Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to the NEST group and to the NEST organizing team for inviting me. My name is Niki Frantzeskaki. I'm currently located in Melbourne with a Center for Urban Transitions at Swinburne University of Technology. I was a senior researcher and then associate professor with the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions from 2010 until 2019 that I moved here. And before that, I did my PhD on sustainability transitions, looking on drivers and barriers for large-scale policy transitions with Technical University of Delft. So I'm very honored to present you a snapshot of the knowledge on urban transitions, from the why to the what to what we know, and also to provoke thinking about future topics of research. So here we go. Definitely the imperative of change and the narrative of transitions is not new. There are different disciplines and there are different also theories of change that exist out there. However, our century, you might say, or our era is an era of multiple triggers for this change and also multiple motives for change. We know that our current systems of production, our current systems of servicing, they do not exactly align with what we need for our future. And we see that across multiple domains. For those that they want a reference also to the previous NEST videos, I'm not going to repeat the definitions of transitions. I'm just going to say that the term sustainability transitions is not anymore used in the scientific and in the research area, but also has crossed over to the policy and to the industry, exactly to signal that we need and we are in demand of necessary large-scale societal changes in order to deal with grand challenges, but also in order to capitalize on opportunities. In a very recent report that we delivered for the European Environment Agency, in order to exactly make a bridge between science and policy on sustainability transitions, we identified the different areas of science, of knowledge, of practice, that they saw evidence that our frameworks of sustainability transitions, they can provide more informed and more daring policy directions and governance directions for change. All these aspects are very important, of course, to our knowledge if we are to progress the research on sustainability transitions. But there are like 4 specific directions or 4 specific elements that we need to keep in mind, especially when we look on cities. It's about multi-actor dynamics. Cities are the places that institutional proximity is at core, making the multi-actor dynamics really at the heart of any form of societal change, especially transitions thinking, transitions practice, and transitions research. Cities and urban places are really contested, making reframing of the problem and the shift to a more systems understanding and complexity understanding really fundamental. The aspect of visions, visionaries, visioning, future images, futuring, and all this research in terms of tools for strategic planning are equally important as we find them for transitions governance, to facilitate, to empower actors and networks, to create collaborators, to create networks and also alliances that they can strategically work on transitions. And the last point is about experimentation and experimenting. From the work of Rob Braven to colleagues on the experimental city, to the work I have been doing together with the Drift colleagues and also with the colleagues here in Melbourne on experiments, on urban experiments and their role in transitions. Experimentation is at the heart and in transitions research and in the urban transitions. The last, you might say, 5 to 6 years, we have seen the urban turn in sustainability transitions, making more important to look on the urban in our theories and in our studies of transitions. But of course, the urban And cities are not new in terms of discipline and in terms of understanding how change happens, how it evolves, and also how it gets contested. Looking from the urban studies perspective, they always talk about change. But looking from a sustainability science perspective, looking on cities, it is something that becomes more and more interesting. From writings on urban decay, on urban justice, to our current era, post-COVID pandemic, we look at all measures and all actions and all experiments, trial and errors that happened during the past 10 months, that actually happened in cities. And cities became the places in the midst of the pandemic to rethink how we work, to rethink urban living, to rethink our economies, to rethink our symbols in urban places, to rethink the model of science, from decolonizing science or not, to rethink how health, environment, justice, but also systems that are on critical infrastructures, they come together and they create what we call the urban living. In 2016, we published 2 papers together with colleague Mark Wolfram on asking exactly this question. Do we see a field developing and emerging on urban transitions? From 2 consecutive literature reviews, one concluding in 2015 and one in 2016, which I present here, we found that there is an emerging field of urban transitions and transformations that sits, you might say, in the interface between our transition studies, with a focus on socio-technical studies and socio-technical systems transitions, and socio-ecological systems studies, resilience thinking, but also socio-ecology thinking. We found that there are key factors and domains, as presented in the diagram, that they're actually very dominant and they're also very prevailing in this emerging field. The field or the area of urban transitions is dominated by bridging the science to policy and planning. The majority of the papers that we reviewed, they showed an immediate link to policy implications, to criticizing policy and planning practice, but also a more forward-looking understanding of how cities change, why they change, and what needs to happen to change. As you see, there is also an emerging research in the field that looks on agency. Agency in terms of different actor configurations that they put in place, and especially the emergence over time of the experimentation, having a specific place-based and urban configuration. In that research, what we find is that there are different motivations of what constitutes an urban transitions research. The focus on system change, looking and recognizing the important role of cities in this, cities as seedbeds for innovation, looking on cities as innovation systems, and as contested sites of implementation. Even research that talks about geography of transitions, and I'm sure Lars Kunen is going to talk about this in the next webinar, looks very much on how the local and regional innovation systems, they are located and they play a role in cities. The second motivation is to understand urban change, how cities play a key role in certain system dynamics and how they develop responses to them. And the third motivation was a relational perspective to place, a relational perspective to cities, linking urban change and system configuration as mutually dependent processes, and understanding also the complexity that these relationships put in place to understand urban transitions. Looking more critically on the different perspectives and the plurality of perspectives that we have when we understand urban transformations, In our work with the Drift team published in this book, we took and explained that there are different perspectives in place when we try to examine, but also when we try to operate and to do action research in the policy science interface. The geography perspective notes of cities as transition spaces or transitionscapes. The complexity perspective that looks on cities in terms of relations as convergence hubs, looking at them on the way different systems converge, how different social relations, but also system relations, they actually interact and how they co-shape cities over time. And also the governance perspective, one of which looks at cities as innovation drivers and puts cities as agents of change. So understanding urban complexity has been rather paramount in transition studies for cities or the urban transitions, looking on complex urban problems that are persistent problems, that they ignore optimization efforts, therefore they require more deeper transformations. The understanding that the current crisis or the concurrent crisis that we are seeing in urban places are rather symptoms of deeper fundamental structural issues rather than issues to solve in isolation. And also the aspect that cities provide exactly the seedbeds of a number of solutions to occur and to emerge. But there is a mismatch between the solutions and the context and the challenge that they are there to actually address. We address this and we discuss this in a number also of research projects and at Drift and now here in Melbourne, looking on how can we scale up, how can we actually provide different enabling conditions and capacities from cities to the solutions that they are locally embedded, but they need to address more global sustainability challenges. These different focal points of understanding urban transitions, they also come with different concepts, different constructs, and to construct research and to understand complexity, but also to bridge again the science policy interface. One of the aspects and one of the dimensions that I have devoted lots of research time and lots of publications and outputs and ongoing projects is the aspect of experimentation. In transition studies, experimentation sits at the heart as one of the mechanisms in which new solutions, new solution configurations emerge, are being co-created, co-produced, co-managed, but also finding ways to break outside the protected space and create new institutional spaces for the experimented solutions to actually be diffused, to be scaled. If we look on how experimentation contributes to urban sustainability transitions, these are 6 statements that I have done, and I have evidence from the research I have conducted over the past 10 years. Experimentation has shown value in forwarding social and policy learning. Experimentation is being used by a lot of cities and local governments as a knowledge mechanism to explore new territories, to identify new opportunities, and also to test new solutions. But mainly, it is about the policy learning, why experimentation is being put forward in a lot of different urban agendas. Testing new solutions, testing new innovations, but also new policy concepts. It is something that experimentation has shown value for and has shown evidence that it actually brings valuable impact in local policy agendas. Trialing new institutions, think about new configurations, new partnerships between the cities and social innovation initiatives. Think about new institutions on the sharing economy, circular cities, about crowdfunding, about citizen budgeting. All these forms of new institutions, they came into place after a short or long period of experimentation. At the same time, experimentation has been used and has shown evidence of creating new relations, breaking stereotypes, lifting stigmas from communities, but also from practitioners, and creating new knowledge, and also tapping on new knowledge across those different actors. Challenging the status quo practices was, you might say, the first motivation of why to go with experimentation as a mechanism to instigate, to discuss, to open space for sustainability transitions in the very early writings. And this still holds. Instead of only talking about what are the barriers, the persistence of the regime, any type of policy regime, socio-technical regime, experimentation has shown a way of challenging it, but also finding and informing ways of being a means to implement urban agendas. I'll just give some sporadic examples, definitely not capturing all the examples and all the case studies that I have conducted over the past years on urban experimentation. This is an example that comes from Thessaloniki, Greece. Is a northern capital, you might say, of the Greek state. And our experiment with Thessaloniki city as part of the Resilient Europe project was to look on how to co-design bicycle lanes with a municipality, so as to see and to make a deprived neighborhood into a more inclusive, accessible, and easy to navigate neighborhood. The idea was to look on Tumba, that is a very challenged neighborhood, but at the same time has many initiatives, many civil society initiatives on green mobility, on cycling. And of course, a lot of people just use the bike, but with a risk of being hurt, of having accidents, given that there is not identified cycle routes in their neighborhood. So going the extra mile, we did this, and on the right side, you see the experiment we did with school children. We involved the traffic police, and is about how can you be a good cyclist, a responsible cyclist, that you respect the rules, that you pay attention, that you is not becoming a harmful activity or a dangerous activity for you to move with a bicycle in the city. On the bottom right again, you see the day that during the Walkable City Day in the city of Thessaloniki in 2017, a number of different citizen initiatives of cyclists, they took over the city, they showcased what would be the bike routes that they would prefer for the city to have, and rethought and redesigned the cycling map together with urban planners and city engineers of the city of Thessaloniki. This did not came with a big welcome, however, from all society groups. On the left side, you see at the same time how a number of citizens, they created leaflets and posters showing that the bikes are actually a danger for the city, that they will be a danger in losing 100 parking places, and that this is actually a very dangerous and violent intrusion to the city life to allow the bikes to be together with the cars as a joint modular infrastructure intervention in the area. During the experiment, we took all these different groups on the same table. We looked on all the issues and actually co-designed an area, co-designed routes that they would be on the compromise space, would be on an optimal space of how to do this. Needless to say, it took the pandemic for these co-design groups to actually be in place right now. I cannot say with certainty just yet how far of the co-design space, how far of these ideas have been put in place in the new cycle routes that the city of Thessaloniki and the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki is put in place due to the pandemic, but it definitely helped looking on citizen engagement differently, learning how to learn from the different aspects of the urban dialogue, and especially on such a contested topic. In the city of Rotterdam, with a very long tradition on experimentation, we have seen experimentation taking a different space and also taking a different way of being integrated in urban planning. From the densification strategy to how floating urbanization commenced, and also how it progressed over time, from the floating neighborhood to the floating forest, all have been, you might say, tactical but also strategic urbanist experiments that the city of Rotterdam put forward, putting the city also in a front-runner seat for all climate adaptation solutions in a global network of cities. Looking on urban transitions, the knowledge we have, the examination of looking on multiple actors, how they innovate, how they relate, how they shift their roles, looking on how we produce our knowledge through co-production, through transdisciplinary research, but also putting experimentation and as a research approach, as a governance approach, but also as a knowledge co-production approach. We look on the bigger scale. We look on the global research on urban transitions with a team of very well-established global researchers on urban. One of our findings through a very long process of engagement with practitioners, with scientists across the globe is, if we look and if we want to secure a better urban future, we need to produce more integrated and actionable urban knowledge. I believe that research on urban transitions from our community, the emerging and growing community of sustainability transitions, has a very vital role to play here. And we see that from metropolitan examples to local examples, to city examples, to city network examples. In recent research we did with Lars Kuhnen and team here in Melbourne, together also with Melbourne City, we see that their experimentation stays at the heart of how progressive urban agendas are put in place. Looking on how multiple actors interact, how they collaborate, how they create alliances and partnerships is also very important. But at the same time, looking from a complexity perspective, recognize and understand self-organization processes are equally important. Moving now from the global to the local, cities operate across scales. Or you might say urban transitions, even though it is about the local, it is about cities, cannot be examined without taking also a multi-scale perspective. In the recent publication we did with the Drift team, bringing together knowledge from the arts project, the transit project, and the gas project, all of them looking on local sustainability transition initiatives and how they create transformational innovation. We saw that even though they operate and they change through growing, partnering, instrumentalizing, replicating, and embedding structures, cultures, practices, ways of knowing, ways of relating, and ways of organizing, we see that they are not operating in isolation of their geography. They operate across different networks. Approaches and solutions and innovations that they put in place, they have a translocal impact. And they're also much more easily transferable nowadays through networks, through platforms, And of course, through partnerships, city networks play an important role in this. Bringing it back to the initial understanding and also to the initial motivations of why to look, what are the motivations for an urban transitions research and for an urban transitions community, it is the systems perspective, understanding cities as interconnected, as enabling reconfigurations of different system elements. From the literature review we finalized in 2016, and of course we are planning to recommence and to add to this with the last 4 years of publications. But we found that the socio-technical systems perspective and the socio-ecological systems perspectives are the ones that they are actually very dominant, but also very distinct on what makes this interface of urban transformations research. In our recent paper with Katharina Holscher, we invited Timon McPherson arguing for an even more integrated perspective of understanding and examining urban transformations, a perspective that brings together socio, ecological, economic, and technological components and domains in place. And with this opens up a quest for a more pluriformity on the way we understand and we evaluate, and we also govern the urban and urban transitions. So the challenge remains that if we do want to talk about the science in cities and a more transformative governance approaches, we need to actually find ways that connect across disciplines, across sectors, scales, and social spheres in order to deal with all these grand challenges that we are facing. Our research in sustainability transitions and in urban transitions are really forward-looking, and is also speaking to policy, speaking to industry, and we do have quite of a role to play. With this message, I want to trigger a little bit of thinking about all the NEST participants and all the, I don't want to say young, I want to say early career researchers of sustainability transitions field to push this boundary, to push the frontier, and to move beyond the trivial questions. Don't get stuck with the old-fashioned or fashion-old questions of the field. 3 nudges on this. Definitely this list is not exhaustive. We talk a lot about scaling of solutions and the issue of scale. The issue of scale in urban studies is an everlasting question, is an everlasting topic. And of course, the research on scaling sustainability solutions to influence, to trigger, to accelerate sustainability transitions is an ongoing debate, is an ongoing research area within the sustainability transitions. The work we did with David Lam that is recently published also shows how different frameworks can come together to provide a more nested perspective for it. But at the same time, I invite a critical perspective, building from this, on looking, what do we actually investigate? Do we investigate the scale or the scaling of local innovation, or the scale of impact these local innovations, these sustainability initiatives are actually put in place? Do you look on scaling as a process of itself, or scaling as a transfer of knowledge, of practice, of know-how, even of impact? And there are also different flavors to it. As I have been writing and saying a lot, we have this fixation with growth. We have this fixation with scaling up. But this is not the only process when we talk about crossing scales or moving across scales. It's also scaling out, it's scaling deep. There are different frameworks and approaches. And again, I invite you to read the most recent publications on this across the field about scaling of sustainability solutions and scaling in the space for transitions. The second nudge, it is about this institutional and governance research quest that we have. coming from that field myself on the governance of sustainability transitions, I have 3 points to add to the NEST community. There is this cross-sectoral collaboration issue across probably all the governance papers, maybe not all, maybe most of the governance papers that they talk about urban transitions. That one of the barriers or of the challenges for actually moving towards systemic change is that in local governments there is no sectoral collaboration, or there is not structurally organized, or there is no institutionalized, or there is not incentivized sectoral collaboration. It starts, if you read critically of all these conclusions, you start to believe that cross-sectoral collaboration is an urban myth. That, okay, it doesn't happen. Or if it happens, it's really ad hoc or exceptional. So instead of having the quest for it, what about if we study and if we closely examine what actually can be a cross-sectoral collaboration? Is it a persistent pathology of cities, and how does it contribute or not to sustainability transitions in cities? At the same time, I invite you to be critical with the research questions. Instead of looking what does not work, maybe we need to ask different type of questions of which configurations or institutional designs can accelerate transitions in the absence of cross-sectoral collaboration, in the absence of metropolitan planning. So think what make the system to navigate towards change, instead of only looking of what blocks change. The third point in terms of governance research for urban transitions is about another fixation we have when we come from institutional studies and for governance studies. Is the fixation to, yes?
Can you put your screen a bit lower so we can see your whole face? Sometimes we don't see your chin very well.
Oh my, it's because I don't see how is this better?
That's perfect, yes.
Okay.
That's lovely. Thank you, sorry for interrupting.
No. So the third aspect is this fixation that we would like to see more permanent institutions in place in order to consider a sustainability transition as finalized or achieved or succeeded or impactful. But research, especially on urban transitions, has shown that a number of very successful institutional interventions that actually accelerated and instigated transformations came from temporal institutions, like learning alliances, like thematic offices, like the resilience offices across a number of cities. So it's not about only following the evidence, but it's about open up your questions beyond what traditional fields or monodisciplined fields have indicated when they talk about change. The third point is about us as researchers, how we think, how we approach, where is our starting point. Rob Raven and Mona's team published a paper about T-shaped researchers that they have a deep knowledge on one discipline, but they work and do research across multiple different disciplines. So they take a perspective from their disciplinary house, you might say, but they're actually contributing and conducting cross-disciplinary research. I think the transitions field is also an example of a field with many T-shaped researchers and with examples of very innovative designs of transdisciplinary research. For progressing the field of urban transformations, a plurality in perspectives and flexibility of frameworks, I find that is very critical. At the same time, I would suggest to avoid to fit frameworks to the urban. It is about understanding the systems perspective, the complexity and the relations that are really important and play a role of how urban transitions unfold, and how they can be driven and influenced in order to create new concepts, innovative conceptual frameworks that explain aspects of urban transformations. We argued this in our book with Lars Kuhnen, Vanessa Castanbrotto, and Dirk Lorbach earlier in 2017, that there is no specific frameworks that can apply in examining and explaining urban transitions. We do need a plurality of perspective. We need to avoid fitting frameworks, but we need to think about hybridize different frameworks, hybridize and connect and creating bridging frameworks and bridging concepts for examining urban complexity. And the last point is taking a cross-disciplinary research perspective in examining urban transitions and in doing research for urban transitions means that not only look at the local, don't only look on the place-based impact, solution, initiative, experiment, but also think at the same time that cities and urban spaces don't operate in isolation. There are translocal processes in place, and also there are global influences and global perspectives at play as well. So us as scientists, and science for urban transitions and science for sustainability transitions has a major role to play. And we know that, but there is more and more different fields and different disciplines that are actually call out for the role of science in transformative change. This is a quote from the Global Assessment co-chair of IPBES, and I really want to cite it, and I really want to also almost finish with it of my speech today. So thank you very much, and I open the floor for questions.